He promised to build me a castle. He promised he would never let me go hungry again. 20 years later, Julian Thorne is the king of New York real estate, and I am the invisible maid scrubbing his marble floors. He does not remember the little girl from the orphanage. He does not remember the promise. But tonight, everything changes. Tonight, a cheap ring, made of twisted copper wire, is about to bring a billionaire to his knees. The sound of 500 crystal champagne glasses shattering silenced the room instantly. The jazz band stopped playing. The laughter died. I was on the floor, my knees bleeding against the shards of glass, the sticky warmth of vintage champagne soaking through my uniform. But the pain in my knees was nothing compared to the burning sting on my cheek. Vanessa stood above me, her chest heaving, her manicured hand still raised in the air. She looked like a vengeful angel in white silk, but her eyes were pure malice. "You filthy little thief!" she screamed, her voice shrill enough to shatter the remaining glass. "Where is it? Where is my engagement ring?" I slowly wiped a streak of blood from my lip. I did not look down. I did not tremble. I looked straight up into her eyes. The guests were gasping, their phones already out recording the spectacle. The black maid on the floor, the wealthy heiress pointing the finger. It was a scene they had seen 1,000 times on the news, a script written for my destruction. "I did not take your ring, Miss Kensington," I said. My voice was low, steady, cutting through her hysteria. "I was refilling the tower. You bumped into me." "Liar!" Vanessa lunged forward, grabbing the collar of my uniform. She shook me, her nails digging into my skin. "That diamond is 5 carats. It is worth more than your entire pathetic existence. I saw you eyeing it all night. I saw you hovering. Empty your pockets." I pushed her hands away firmly. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The help was fighting back. "Check my pockets," I said, standing up slowly, ignoring the glass slicing into my shins. "Check them. But when you find nothing, you will apologize to me in front of every camera in this room." Vanessa let out a cruel, high-pitched laugh. "Apologize to you? You are lucky I do not have security drag you out by your hair right now. Kneel down, strip that apron off. I want to see everything." I stood like a statue. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my face was stone. I thought of the little girl I used to be, the one who survived the cold nights in Detroit. I survived hunger. I survived the fire. I would not break for a spoiled woman in a penthouse. "I will not kneel," I said, my voice rising just enough to echo off the vaulted ceiling. "Not to you. Not to anyone." That is when the heavy oak doors blasted open. The air in the room shifted. Temperature dropped 10 degrees. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Julian Thorne had arrived. Julian Thorne did not run. He did not shout. He moved with the terrifying stillness of a predator entering a clearing. The crowd parted instantly. He looked at the shattered champagne tower, then at Vanessa, sobbing theatrically into a silk handkerchief, and finally at me. His eyes were cold, empty. There was no recognition in them, no memory of the boy who once shared a stale crust of bread with me in a dark basement. There was only the billionaire who saw a stain on his perfect evening. "What is this chaos?" Julian asked. His voice was low, but it carried more weight than Vanessa's screaming ever could. "She stole it," Vanessa wailed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She stole the engagement ring, Julian." She pushed me and tried to run. Julian turned to me. He did not ask for my side of the story. He did not ask if I was hurt, despite the blood trickling down my shin. He simply held out his hand, palm up. "Give it back," he said. The command was absolute. "I did not take it, Mr. Thorne." I said, my voice shook slightly, but I held his gaze. "I have never stolen anything in my life." "I do not have time for this," Julian said, checking his watch as if my dignity was a scheduling conflict. "We have investors here. We have press. I will not let a thief ruin the merger announcement. Security." Two burly men in dark suits stepped forward from the shadows. "Search her," Julian ordered. I froze. "You cannot be serious," I said, stepping back. My heart pounded against my ribs. "Not here, not in front of everyone. Take me to the office. Call the police if you must." "But do not do this here," I said. "Search her." Julian repeated, his voice void of any emotion. "If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. Empty her pockets. Turn them inside out. If the ring is not there, check her shoes, check everything." The first guard grabbed my arm. His grip was like iron. I gasped as he twisted me around roughly. The guests watched in silence, 1,000 eyes drinking in my humiliation. I saw phones raised, recording every second of my shame. The flash of cameras blinded me, capturing the moment the powerful billionaire crushed the help. "Get your hands off me," I hissed, trying to pull away, but the second guard grabbed my other arm. They patted down my apron roughly, their hands searching with no respect for my body or my boundaries. They shoved their hands into my pockets, tearing the fabric in their haste. Vanessa watched with a satisfied smirk, wiping her dry eyes. She wanted this. She wanted me broken. I bit my lips so hard I tasted metallic copper blood. I refused to cry. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing tears. I locked my eyes on a spot on the wall above Julian, head thinking of the only thing that kept me going, my degree, my truth. The fact that I was not just a maid, I was an architect whose designs were stolen by the woman standing next to him. But right now, I was just a body being violated for the sake of a rich man's schedule. "Found something," the guard grunted. He pulled his hand out of my deep apron pocket. He was not holding a diamond. He was holding a small, twisted piece of metal that caught the light, dull and unimpressive. The guard looked at it with confusion and then tossed it toward Julian with a sneer. "Just this trash, sir," the guard said. The object clattered onto the polished marble floor, spinning before coming to a rest at Julian's Italian leather shoes. It was not the 5-carat diamond. It was a ring made of old copper wire, twisted by the clumsy hands of a 12-year-old boy holding a piece of green sea glass found in a muddy puddle. The room went silent, waiting for Julian to kick it away, waiting for the final judgment. But Julian did not kick it. He stared at the copper wire. And for the first time all night, the ice in his eyes cracked. The guard grabbed the hem of my apron with both hands. He yanked it upward, effectively, turning the deep pockets inside out. The fabric snapped. I closed my eyes for a second, praying for a miracle, praying that Vanessa had not managed to plant the diamond on me. While I was distracted, gravity took over. The contents of my pockets rained down onto the pristine white marble of the penthouse floor. The sound was not the heavy thud of a 5-carat stone. It was a light, hollow clatter. I opened my eyes. The crowd leaned in their collective breath, held phone cameras zooming in to capture the evidence of my crime. But the floor remained empty of diamonds. No sparkle, no fire, no million-dollar evidence. There were only 3 things: a crumpled tissue, a plastic wrapper from a cough drop, and a ring. It was not the ring everyone was looking for. It sat there on the cold stone, looking impossibly small and out of place. It was made of copper wire, the kind stripped from old electrical cords. The metal was dark with age, twisted into a braided band. At the top, acting as the jewel, was a piece of green sea glass. It was frosted and dull-chipped on one side. The guard looked down at it. He nudged it with the toe of his shiny black shoe. "Nothing here, sir," he grunted, looking at it. "Julian, just some trash." Vanessa's face twisted. The triumph drained out of her, replaced by a flash of panic. She had been so sure. She scanned the floor frantically. "Where is it?" she screeched. "You hid it. Where did you put it?" She looked at the copper ring, and her lip curled. She let out a harsh, incredulous laugh that echoed off the high ceilings. "Is this a joke?" she asked, pointing a manicured finger at the floor. She looked at the guests, inviting them to join in her mockery. "Look at this! I accuse her of stealing a fortune, and she is carrying around garbage." She stepped closer, her white silk dress swishing around her legs. She towered over the small object. "You are even more pathetic than I thought." She sneered at me. A magpie collecting shiny trash from the gutter. "Is this your jewelry? Is this what you people consider precious?" My hands clenched into fists at my sides. That wire had been stripped from a condemned building in Detroit during a blizzard. That glass had been found on a day we were starving. It was worth more than her entire life. "Throw it away," Vanessa commanded, waving her hand dismissively at a waiter. "Get this filth out of my sight!" The waiter hesitated. "Fine," Vanessa snapped. "I will do it myself." She lifted her foot. The heel of her stiletto was 4 inches of steel, sharp enough to puncture skin, sharp enough to shatter the old fragile glass on the floor. "It is just trash," she said, her eyes locking with mine, daring me to move. "And trash belongs in the bin." She brought her heel down. "No!" The scream tore out of my throat before I could stop it. It was a primal sound, raw and desperate. I did not care about the cameras. I did not care about the guards holding my arms. I wrenched myself free with a strength I did not know I had. I threw myself toward the floor, diving between her deadly heel and the only thing that mattered. The world stopped spinning. The chatter of the wealthy elite faded into a dull roar like static on an old radio. Julian did not see the Italian marble anymore. He did not see the crystal chandeliers or the horrified faces of his investors. All he saw was that twisted piece of copper wire lying defenseless on the cold floor. It was ugly. It was crude. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Suddenly, the air in the penthouse was not scented with expensive perfume and champagne. It smelled like wet concrete and mildew. It smelled like Detroit, in November. The flashback hit him like a physical blow. 1998. The rain was freezing that night, piercing through his thin jacket. He was 12 years old, shivering behind the dumpster of the foster home, trying to shield a skinny girl with big tear-filled eyes, form the wind. Her name was Cece. She was crying because the foster father had thrown her drawing book into the mud. "Don't cry," Cece young Julian had whispered. His hands were raw and bleeding from stripping wire at the scrapyard all day. He held out his hand, revealing the crude ring he had made. The copper was uneven, the green glass was just a shard from a broken beer bottle found in the alley, but in the moonlight it glowed. "I don't have a diamond yet," he had said, slipping it onto her small finger. "But I promise you, Cece, one day I will build you a castle. One day I will trade this copper for a diamond, big enough to blind them all. Just wait for me. I will marry you. I will wait," the girl had whispered back, hugging him tight. The memory was so vivid that Julian could almost feel the freezing rain on his skin. He could feel the warmth of her small hand. Then reality crashed back in. He saw Vanessa's stiletto heel descending like a guillotine. That sharp steel point was about to crush the only pure thing remaining in his life. It was about to shatter the promise into dust. "Stop!" The word ripped out of his throat. It was not a request. It was a roar that shook the walls. Julian lunged. He did not care about his suit. He did not care about his dignity. He threw himself forward, his hand shooting out to snatch the ring from the floor just inches before Vanessa's shoe could destroy it. The metal bit into his palm. It was cold. It was real. It was not a hallucination. He scrambled to his feet, clutching the ring to his chest, as if it were a grenade that might explode. His breath came in ragged gasps. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs, terrified and hopeful all at once. He turned slowly to look at the maid, at Simone. For the first time that night, he actually looked at her. He did not see a servant. He searched her face frantically, looking for the girl from the rain. He looked for Cece in the curve of her jaw, in the depth of her eyes. But all he saw was a woman in a maid's uniform looking back at him with defiant, terrified eyes. His mind warred with his heart. Logic screamed that Cece was dead. The police report from 15 years ago said she died in the fire at the group home. But his heart held the copper ring, and it felt like life. Julian's eyes burned red with a mix of grief and sudden terrifying rage. He took a step toward her, his voice trembling with a dangerous intensity. "Where did you get this?" he growled, holding up the ring. His hand shook uncontrollably. "Who are you really?" Julian stared at the woman in the maid uniform. His heart wanted to pull her into his arms, wanted to believe that the little girl with the braids and the bright smile had somehow returned from the dead. But his brain slammed the brakes. He was not a 12-year-old boy anymore. He was a man who had built a billion-dollar empire by spotting liars, frauds, and opportunists, and right now every alarm bell in his head was ringing. He closed his fist around the copper ring, squeezing it until the metal bit into his skin. The vulnerability vanished from his face, replaced by a mask of cold fury. "You are good," he said. His voice was deadly quiet. "You almost had me for a second." I blinked, confused by the sudden shift in his energy. "What are you talking about?" I asked. My voice trembled, but I held my ground. "I am not playing a game, Julian. It is me." "Do not say that name," Julian roared, making me flinch. "Do not dare use that name to manipulate me. Cecilia Vance died in a fire 15 years ago. I saw the report. I paid for her funeral. I saw the death certificate myself. So tell me, who are you really? Did you dig up a grave to find this? Did you steal it from a dead girl's finger just to blackmail me?" The accusation hit me harder than Vanessa's slap. He thought I was a grave robber. He thought I was using our shared trauma as a weapon. Tears finally welled up in my eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer injustice of it all. "I am not dead," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I ran away. The fire was an accident, but the records were wrong. Julian, please look at me." "Liar." Vanessa stepped forward, a triumphant smile returning to her red lips. "See," she purred, wrapping a possessive arm around Julian. Tense shoulders. "I told you she was a criminal. She probably researched your past just to pull a con like this. She is disgusting. Officer, arrest her immediately. Get this filth out of our house." The security guards stepped forward, reaching for their handcuffs, ready to drag me away to a cell. But Julian raised his hand, stopping them in their tracks. "No," he commanded. The word cracked like a whip across the room. "Do not call the police, not yet." "But Julian, she is dangerous," Vanessa protested, her smile faltering. "She stole your property. She is clearly unstable. Ignoring her." Julian looked at the head of security with eyes as hard as flint. "Take her to my private study. Lock the door, post a guard outside. No one goes in or out until I say so." "But sir," the guard hesitated. "Do it," Julian snarled. "I want to interrogate her myself. I want to know exactly how she got this ring and who hired her to stage this little performance before I hand her over to the cops. Now move." The guards grabbed my arms, hauling me up roughly. I looked back at Julian one last time, pleading with my eyes, but he had turned his back to me. He was staring down at the copper ring in his hand as if it were a poisonous snake waiting to bite. He did not see a long-lost friend. He saw a threat, and Julian Thorne destroyed threats. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut, sealing us inside a room that smelled of old leather and expensive scotch. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating like the calm before a storm. Julian paced back and forth, his shadow stretching long against the walls lined with books he probably never read. He did not look like the boy who used to share his blanket with me in the drafty attic of the group home. He looked like a predator cornering its prey. Finally, he stopped and slammed the copper ring onto his massive oak desk. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. He did not turn to face me immediately. He stood there gripping the edge of the desk, his knuckles turning white, as if he was restraining himself from doing something violent. "Start talking," he commanded. His voice was low and dangerous. "Tell me who you are, and tell me exactly how you got your hands on this ring, because if you lie to me, I will destroy you. I will make sure you never work in this city again." I stood by the door, shivering slightly in my thin uniform. My knees were still stinging from the glass cuts, but the pain in my chest was far worse. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in years. I wanted to scream. I wanted to say, "Julian, it is me, Cece. I am the girl who promised to wait for you." But the man standing in front of me was not my Julian. My Julian was kind. He protected the weak. He would have given his last meal to a hungry stranger. This man was cruel. He was willing to crush a woman just to save his reputation. He was a monster made of money and ice. If I told him the truth, now he would not believe me. Or worse, he would look at me with that same cold disgust he had shown in the ballroom, and that would kill me completely. I realized with a breaking heart that I would rather be a stranger to him than watch him reject the memory of us. I would rather him hate me for being a thief than hate me for being the disappointment of his past, so I swallowed the truth. I buried Cece deep inside where he could never hurt her again. I lifted my chin and looked him in the eye, forcing my voice to be steady. "I found it. I lied." The words tasted like ash in my mouth. "I found it in the trash behind the old orphanage on Elm Street. I thought it was pretty, so I kept it." "The trash." Julian repeated the word flatly, disbelief dripping from his tone. He walked around the desk, closing the distance between us, until I could feel the heat radiating from his furious body. His eyes searched mine, hunting for a crack in my story, looking for the lie. "You are telling me," he whispered, leaning in close enough that I could smell the faint scent of rain and anger on him. "You are telling me that you just happened to find a ring made by a 12-year-old boy in the garbage and decided to keep it for 15 years. You expect me to believe that I dug my fingernails into my palms, grounding myself. It was not in the garbage I wanted to shout. You gave it to me, but instead I forced a shrug, making myself look small and simple. One man's trash is another man's treasure, Mr. Thorne," I said quietly. I did not know it belonged to a billionaire. I just liked the glass. Julian stared at me, and for a second I saw a flicker of pain in his eyes, a ghost of the boy who used to look at me with adoration. But he blinked, and the wall came back up harder than before. He hated my answer. He wanted it to be something else. He wanted a reason to destroy me because that was easier than feeling whatever this ring made him feel. Julian laughed, a cold, sharp sound that bounced off the mahogany walls. "You expect me to believe that," he asked. "You expect me to believe you kept a piece of garbage for 15 years just because you liked the glass." He shook his head slowly, looking at the ring with disgust. "You are a terrible liar, Simone. Or whatever your name is. This is a prop. It is a cheap emotional hook, designed to make me sentimental, and I am going to prove it." He turned on his heel and strode toward the fireplace. It was a modern electric unit, but the heating coils were glowing a fierce, angry orange, pumping waves of heat into the cool room. Julian held the ring over the vent, directly over the searing heat. "If it is just trash, you will not mind if I dispose of it," he said. His eyes challenged me, dared me to break character, dared me to drop the act. My heart stopped. He tossed the ring. It was a casual flick of his wrist. The copper wire spun through the air, arcing toward the glowing red coils inside the metal grate. "No!" The scream tore out of my throat. I did not think. I did not calculate. I launched myself across the room, diving toward the fireplace like a soldier diving on a grenade. My knees hit the hardwood floor with a sickening crack. But I kept reaching. I thrust my hand into the opening, directly toward the heat. My fingers closed around the hot metal just as it hit the coil's pain, exploded in my palm. A sharp, searing bite that made my vision blur. I smelled the faint scent of singed fabric from my sleeve and the acrid smell of my own burning skin. But I had it. I curled my fist tight, shielding the copper wire with my own flesh, and pulled my hand back, cradling it against my chest. I stayed on the floor, gasping for air, rocking back and forth, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. The pain in my hand was throbbing, a steady drumbeat of agony, but the ring was safe. The glass was not cracked. The wire was not melted. The room went deathly silent. Julian stood over me, frozen. His hand was still outstretched, mid-toss, but his face had lost all its arrogance. He looked at my hand clutched to my chest. He looked at the red angry welt forming on the side of my palm where I had touched the grate. "You burned yourself," he whispered. His voice was stripped of anger, replaced by genuine shock. "You just put your hand in a fire." He dropped to his knees beside me, grabbing my wrist. His fingers were cool against my feverish skin. He forced my hand open, gentle but firm. My palm was red, blistered in the center. Lying in the middle of the wound was the cheap copper ring. "Why?" Julian asked. Looking from the injury to my face, his eyes were wide, searching, frantic. "Why would you do that for a piece of trash? Why would you hurt yourself for this?" I pulled my hand back, protecting the ring, protecting the truth. "Because it is not trash to me," I whispered, my voice trembling. "This is the only thing I have left." The smell of seared skin triggered a memory so potent it buckled Julian's knees. The luxury of the penthouse dissolved. The warmth of the electric fireplace vanished. He was not 32 years old anymore. He was 12, and he was freezing, Detroit, 1998. It was the winter that broke records. The pipes in the Henderson group home had burst 3 days ago. But Mr. Henderson did not call a plumber. He just turned up the television to drown out the sound of the children coughing. The state of Michigan sent a check every month for each of the 6 foster kids living in that rotting Victorian house on Elm Street. The checks were cashed immediately. The kids, however, were fed oatmeal and water. Julian remembered the basement. It was their punishment room. That night he had been thrown down there for stealing an apple from the kitchen counter. The darkness was absolute, thick with the smell of mold and rat droppings. He sat on the freezing concrete, hugging his knees, trying to stop his teeth from chattering. The door at the top of the stairs creaked open. A sliver of yellow light cut through the blackness. "Cece," Julian whispered, his voice raspy from crying. "It is me," she whispered back. She did not come down the stairs. She slid down the railing, silent as a shadow. She was small for her age, 11, but looking like she was 8. Her foster care file said she was difficult, unmanageable, but Julian knew she was just terrified. She reached into her oversized sweater and pulled out a treasure, half a loaf of stale bread she had swiped from the pantry while Henderson passed out in his armchair. "Eat," she said, breaking off a chunk and handing it to him. Her hands were shaking. "You eat," Julian insisted, pushing it back. "Henderson did not feed you dinner either." "We share," she said stubbornly. Her eyes were huge in the dark, resolute and fierce. "We always share, Julian." They sat huddled together under a moth-eaten blanket, sharing the dry bread crumb by crumb. It tasted like dust, but it felt like love. Outside, the wind howled against the boarded-up windows. Inside, they were the only 2 people in the world who mattered. That was the night Julian found the wire. It was stripping from the old fuse box in the corner. He picked it up, twisting the copper around his bruised fingers, just to keep them moving, just to keep the frostbite away. Cece was holding a piece of green glass she had found in the snow earlier, pretending it was an emerald. "Give me your hand," Julian had said. He took the copper wire and wrapped it around her ring finger. The metal was cold, but his hands were warm. He twisted the ends to hold the piece of green glass in place. It was crude, it was ugly, it was the best he could do. "I do not have any money," Julian whispered, looking at the makeshift ring. but I promise you. Cece, I am going to get us out of here. I am going to make so much money that no one can ever lock us in a basement again. I will build you a castle, and this ring. It is a placeholder. I will replace it with a diamond the size of your fist. Cece looked at the copper wire like it was the crown jewels. She did not care about the diamond. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I do not want a castle, Julian, she said softly. I just want you. Promise me you will never leave me. I promise, Julian said, squeezing her hand tight. I will marry you, Cece, and I never break a promise. The memory faded, leaving Julian gasping for air in his study, staring at the woman on the floor, cradling her burned hand, woman who had just thrown herself into a fire to save that exact piece of copper wire. The woman who had kept his promise when he had forgotten it. Julian pulled his hand away from mine as if he had been burned. The moment of vulnerability shattered instantly, replaced by the cold, hard armor of the billionaire CEO. He stood up, brushing the dust from his trousers, and pressed the intercom button on his desk roughly. Bring the scanner, Julian ordered. His voice was back to being steel and ice. 2 minutes later, the head of security marched in, carrying a portable biometric tablet. It was a sleek, black device that looked more like a weapon than a tool. Julian pointed to the glass surface. Put your hand there, he commanded. Do not test me, Simone, or whatever your name is today. I hesitated, cradling my bandaged hand against my chest. The burn was throbbing a steady pulse of pain, but the pain in my heart was sharper. I knew what that machine would find. It would not find a criminal. It would not find a thief, but it would find the one thing that had destroyed my life 5 years ago. The lie that Vanessa had planted on my permanent record. I pressed my uninjured thumb against the cold glass. The machine hummed, scanning the ridges of my skin, scanning my identity. A green light flashed, followed by a sharp beep. The data loaded on the screen, filling the room with the blue glow of digital judgment. Julian snatched the tablet from the guard. He scrolled through the file, his eyes darting back and forth, reading the summary of my existence. Simone Carter, he read aloud. The name sounded strange coming from his lips, alien and distant. Born in Detroit, high honors student, full scholarship to the New York Institute of Architecture. He paused, looking up at me with genuine confusion. You were an architecture student? Top of your class? Why is a valedictorian scrubbing my floors? Keep reading, I whispered. My throat felt tight. Julian looked back at the screen and his expression hardened. The confusion vanished, replaced by a look of grim satisfaction. Ah, here it is. Expelled in the final semester of senior year, stripped of all credits and blacklisted from the industry. Reason gross, academic dishonesty, plagiarism. He turned the screen toward me, showing me my own mugshot from the university disciplinary hearing. It was a picture of a girl who had just lost everything, a girl who had been framed by her rich roommate, Vanessa Kensington. So it is a pattern, Julian said, his voice dripping with disdain. You are not just a thief of jewelry, you are a thief of ideas. You stole a design project from a fellow student, tried to pass it off as your own and got caught, and now you are here trying to steal my memories. It was a setup, I said, my voice trembling with the effort to not scream. You have to believe me, Julian. I designed that project. Vanessa stole it from me. Vanessa, Julian laughed, a harsh barking sound. You expect me to believe that my fiancée, the daughter of a media mogul, needed to steal a design from a charity case like you? You are a pathological liar, Simone. The report is right here in black and white. You are a fraud. He tossed the tablet onto the desk with a clatter, looking at me with absolute finality. I almost felt sorry for you, he said coldly. I almost believed the tears, but this proves it. You are a professional manipulator. You researched my past. You found out about the orphanage, and you brought that ring here to play on my sympathies. Well, it ends now. He turned to the guard. Keep her here. Do not let her leave this room. I am going back to the party to announce my engagement to a woman who actually knows the meaning of loyalty. When I come back, We are going to decide exactly how long you will rot in prison for this." The heavy lock of the guest bathroom door clicked shut, drowning out the murmur of the party outside, but it could not drown out the screaming in my own head. I leaned against the cold marble sink, staring at my reflection in the gold-framed mirror. My hands were shaking so badly. I smeared my red lipstick across my cheek, making me look like a deranged clown. "It is her," I whispered to the empty room. My voice sounded thin, hysterical. "It is actually her." I had recognized those eyes the moment she refused to kneel. Simone Carter, the scholarship student from Detroit. The girl who was always smarter, always faster, always better than me in every architecture class. The girl whose portfolio I had swapped with mine 5 years ago, because I knew I was failing, and she was destined for greatness. I grabbed my clutch purse and dug through it frantically, my nails scratching against the leather, until I found my phone. I dialed the one number that had solved every problem I had ever had. "Daddy." "Pick up, pick up, pick up," I hissed, pacing the small room like a trapped animal. Finally, the line clicked. "Vanessa." "It is the middle of your engagement party," a deep, gruff voice answered. "Make it quick, Daddy. We have a problem," I said, my voice trembling. "I need you to fix something. There is a Maid here. She is. She is a problem." "Fire her," my father said dismissively. "You are a Kensington, Vanessa. Stop bothering me with domestic issues." "No, Daddy, you do not understand." I gripped the phone tighter. "It is Simone Carter, the girl from college, the one whose designs I used for the Thorne Tower. She is here inside the penthouse. Julian is interrogating her right now." The line went dead silent. The silence was worse than shouting. My father knew exactly what was at stake. If Julian found out that his precious billion-dollar headquarters was designed by a maid and not his fiancée, the scandal would destroy us. It would destroy the merger. It would destroy me. "What does she know?" my father asked, his voice suddenly sharp and alert. "She knows everything," I whispered. "She has a ring. A stupid copper ring that Julian seems obsessed with. He is softening, Daddy. I saw it in his eyes. He is looking at her like she is a person, not a servant. If they talk, if she tells him about the structural flaw in the tower." "Fix it," my father commanded. He did not offer help. He offered an order. "Get rid of her, Vanessa. Discredit her. Make sure that by the time she opens her mouth, no one will believe a word she says. Do whatever you have to do." The call ended. I lowered the phone, slowly staring at my reflection again. Fear was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I could not let her talk. I could not let her ruin my life again, just by existing. I opened my secret compartment in my purse. Inside, tucked away for emergencies, was a small plastic bag filled with white powder. It was not baking soda. It was a party favor. I had confiscated from a guest earlier, intending to use it later. But now it had a better purpose. If Julian thought she was a thief, he might forgive her. But if he thought she was a junkie, a danger to his company, a liability. I looked at the bag and smiled. It was a cruel smile, one that did not reach my eyes. "I am sorry, Simone," I whispered to the mirror, smoothing my dress. "But there is only room for one architect." In this family, I unlocked the door and slipped out into the hallway, heading not back to the party, but toward the servants' quarters, specifically, toward the hook, where a familiar gray apron was hanging unattended. I had about 30 seconds to plant the evidence that would send Simone Carter to prison for a very long time. The hallway leading to the service wing was silent, a stark contrast to the jazz music and laughter drifting from the ballroom. Vanessa moved quickly, her white silk dress rustling like the skin of a snake sliding through dry leaves. She checked over her shoulder once, twice, paranoia prickling at the back of her neck, but no one was there. The staff were all busy serving champagne to her father. as friends, and the security team was occupied guarding the study where Julian was tearing Simone apart. Vanessa slipped into the coat check room. It was small and smelled of industrial lemon cleaner and damp wool. Along the back wall hung a row of hooks holding the personal belongings of the invisible people who kept the penthouse running. It did not take long to find it. Simone's bag was as pathetic as she was. It was a worn-out canvas tote, frayed at the handles, gray with age and use. It looked like something rescued from a dumpster, Vanessa sneered, reaching out with a manicured hand to touch the rough fabric. She hated poverty. She hated the way it smelled, the way it looked. But most of all, she hated that someone from that world dared to challenge her. She opened the tote bag. Inside, there was a sketchbook, a bottle of water, and a folded bus schedule. No money, no keys, just the bare essentials of a life lived on the edge. It was pathetic, really, but it was about to become criminal. Vanessa opened her expensive crystal-encrusted clutch, trembling with adrenaline. She pulled out the small Ziploc bag. The white powder inside looked innocent enough, like sugar or baking soda. But in the world of high-stakes reputation management, it was a nuclear bomb. It did not matter if it was actually fentanyl or just crushed-up aspirin. The accusation alone would be a death sentence. The headlines would write themselves, "Maid caught with lethal drugs at Billionaires. Party goodbye. Simone." Vanessa whispered, her voice dripping with venom. She shoved the plastic bag deep into the side pocket of the canvas tote, burying it under the sketchbook. She wanted to make sure it was found, but not too easily. It had to look like a secret stash. A desperate addict, as hidden supply. She pulled her hand back, feeling a rush of dark euphoria. This was how the world worked. The strong devoured the weak. The rich wrote the history books, and the poor got erased. Simone had tried to rise above her station. She had tried to be an architect, a rival, a human being. Vanessa was simply putting her back in her place. She smoothed her dress, checking her reflection in the small mirror by the door. Perfect, the grieving fiancé. The victim, the outraged hostess. She took a deep breath, summoning fake tears, and practiced outrage. Now she thought, stepping back out into the hallway and heading toward the security office. It is time to make an anonymous tip. It is time to flush this rat out of my house for good. The heavy oak door to the study did not just open. It exploded inward, hitting the wall with a deafening crack. Julian marched back into the room, and he looked like a man who had just seen his entire belief system crumble. He did not look at me with the confusion or the hidden longing he had shown earlier. Now his face was a mask of absolute cold fury. He marched to the desk and threw a thick manila folder onto the polished wood. It slid across the surface, stopping inches from my hand. It was a printout of my background check. The digital judgment. I had feared. I gave you a chance. Julian said, his voice low and shaking with suppressed rage. I gave you 10 minutes to tell me the truth, to tell me why a valedictorian is scrubbing toilets. But you lied. You played the innocent orphan card. I did not lie, I started to say, but he cut me off with a sharp slash of his hand. Stop, he roared. Do not insult my intelligence. The university records are clear. You were expelled for stealing designs. You are a fraud, Simone. You have spent your entire life taking things that do not belong to you. First academic credit. Now my family memories. Before I could defend myself, before I could explain that Vanessa was the one who stole from me, the door opened again. This time it was the head of security. He walked in holding my worn-out canvas tote bag as if it were a dead animal. He looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting between Julian and me. Sir, the guard said, clearing his throat. We finished searching her personal belongings, found in the coat check. Julian did not turn around immediately. He kept his eyes locked on mine, pinning me in place with his disgust. What is it? He snapped. Did you find more stolen jewelry? No, sir, the guard said quietly. It is worse. Julian finally turned around. The guard reached into the side pocket of my tote bag and pulled out a small plastic Ziploc bag filled with fine white powder. It looked innocent enough, like sugar or baking soda. But in the context of a high-security search, it only meant one thing. "We tested a sample with the field kit," the guard said, placing the bag on the desk next to the copper ring. "It is positive, sir. It is a high-grade synthetic opioid, likely fentanyl." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. I stared at the bag. My mouth fell open inside my chest. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm of denial. "That is not mine," I gasped, stepping forward, my hands shaking violently. "I have never seen that before in my life. Someone put that there. Check the bag for fingerprints. Check the cameras." "Silence," Julian shouted. The word echoed off the walls, vibrating in my bones. He looked down at the white powder, then at the copper ring, and finally at me. The look in his eyes broke me. It was not anger anymore. It was something far worse. It was revulsion. He looked at me like I was something dirty, something that had crawled out of a sewer to infect his pristine world. "A thief," Julian listed, counting off on his fingers, looking at me with dead eyes. "A liar, a fraud, and now a junkie." "No," I whispered, tears finally spilling over. "Is this why you came here?" Julian asked, his voice quiet and cruel. "To steal enough to fund your habit. Did you use the ring as a prop to get close to me so you could rob the safe? Is that what the burn on your hand is for? A dramatic performance to distract me while you scouted the room?" "It was Vanessa," I screamed, desperation making my voice shrill. "She put it there. She hates me, Julian. She stole my life 5 years ago, and she is doing it again right now." "Do not say her name," Julian hissed, leaning across the desk until his face was inches from mine. "Do not dare blame the woman who has stood by me for years for your own degeneracy. Vanessa is a lady. You are a criminal." He turned to the guard, getting the answer he needed, the justification to erase me from his conscience. "Call the police," he ordered, handing the bag of drugs back to the guard. "Tell them we have a guest who decided to bring a felony into my home. I want her out of here. I want her processed, and I want her gone." By the time I finished my toast, Julian turned his back on me, staring out the window at the dark city skyline, dismissing me as if I no longer existed. But he did not see me reach for the architectural plans hanging on his wall. He did not see the fire that ignited in my eyes, replacing the tears. He thought he was sending a junkie to prison. He had no idea he was about to wake up a sleeping dragon. Julian had his hand on the heavy brass doorknob, ready to walk out and leave me to the wolves. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. I looked at the bag of white powder on the desk, and then I looked at the man who used to be my protector. He saw a junkie, he saw a failure, but he was looking at the wrong things. I stood up slowly. The movement was not aggressive, but it was deliberate. I wiped the tears from my cheeks with the back of my hand and straightened my spine, pushing the pain of my burned hand into the background. I was not Cece, the orphan, anymore. I was Simone Carter, the architect. "Mr. Thorne," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the air like a laser. "Look at the wall behind you." Julian stopped. His shoulders stiffened. He did not turn around immediately. "I do not have time for your games, Simone," he said coldly. "Look at the wall," I repeated, sharper this time, commanding him, just like I used to command a construction crew. "Look at the blueprints for the Thorne Tower." He finally turned, his face twisted with impatience. He glanced at the massive framed schematics that dominated the room. "So what?" he snapped. "It is my building. It is the masterpiece that Vanessa designed." "It is a masterpiece," I agreed, walking past him, ignoring the way he flinched as if I were contagious. "But Vanessa did not design it." "I did." Julian laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. "You are delusional," he said. "You are a drug addict who thinks she can claim credit for the most advanced skyscraper in New York. Then ask yourself this," I said, stepping closer, pointing a trembling finger at the complex web of steel beams drawn in white ink on the blue paper. "Ask yourself why the load-bearing system on the 42nd floor uses a double inverted triangle structure. It is not standard engineering, Julian. It is a variation of the Warren Truss modified to handle the high wind shear from the Atlantic. It is called the Carter Truss. I named it after myself when I drew it in my dorm room at 3 in the morning. Julian went still. His eyes flicked to the drawing, then back to me. Vanessa told me it was an aesthetic choice. He said slowly, his voice losing some of its certainty. She said the triangles were for style. Style does not hold up 1,000,000 tons of steel and glass. I said, my voice rising with the heat of my conviction. Style does not prevent the building, say, from swaying during the hurricane. That truss is a mathematical necessity derived from an equation that I wrote. An equation that Vanessa Kensington could not solve if her life depended on it. You called me trash, Julian. You called me a fraud. But the truth is, you are spending $1 billion building a monument to my mind. You are building my legacy, not hers. Julian walked over to the wall, his footsteps heavy on the plush carpet. He stood next to me, looking at the blue and white lines that represented his legacy. He wanted to find a flaw in my logic. He wanted to prove that I was just a desperate maid, making up stories to save her skin. But as he looked at the diagram on the wall, his eyes narrowed. He was a businessman now, but he had started in construction. He knew how to read a print. Look right here, I said, tapping my finger against the glass covering the document. Floor 45, beam number 8. Do you see the thickness of the steel connection? Vanessa drew it at a 0.5 ratio. So, what Julian asked. His voice was tight. It is a standard connection for a residential high-rise. For a residential high-rise in the suburbs. Yes, I countered. But not for a glass tower in the wind tunnel of Midtown Manhattan. I turned to face him fully, my eyes locking onto his. This building is designed to sway, Julian. It has to breathe with the wind. But Vanessa copied my preliminary sketch, not the final calculation. She kept the aesthetic curve, but she missed the load-bearing requirement. If the wind speed hits force 7 or higher, that beam will not flex. It will snap. Julian went pale. The blood drained from his face as the implication hit him. Force 7 winds were not uncommon in New York during storm season. If that beam snaps, I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper, the vibration will travel down the rigid spine of the north face. The tempered glass panels will not be able to handle the oscillation. They will shatter, Julian. It will rain 2 tons of glass onto the sidewalk below. It will not just be a structural failure, it will be a massacre. You are lying, he whispered, but there was no conviction in his voice. He looked back at the drawing, tracing the line with his eyes, doing the math in his head. I wish I was lying, I said. I tried to warn the university board 5 years ago when Vanessa stole my portfolio. I told them the designs were incomplete, that they were dangerous. But they did not listen to the scholarship student from Detroit. They listened to the girl with the last name Kensington, and now you are about to make the same mistake. Julian backed away from the wall, looking at the blueprint as if it had suddenly turned into a monster. He ran a hand through his hair, his composure cracking. Vanessa said she hired top engineers to review this, he muttered to himself. She said it was perfect. Vanessa hired people who tell her what she wants to hear. I said simply, she hired people who saw the Kensington name and rubber-stamped the permits. But physics does not care about your last name. Physics does not care about your bank account. If you build it like this, it will fall, and when it does, the blood will be on your hands, not hers. The room fell silent. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, counting down the seconds to a disaster that had not happened yet. Julian looked at me, and for the first time the disgust was gone, replaced by a terrifying dawn of realization. He was beginning to see that the woman he was about to marry was not just a thief, she was a liability. Prove it, he said. His voice was harsh, desperate. He pointed to the desk where a notepad and a gold pen sat waiting. Write down the equation. Show me the math. If you are really the architect you say you are, then fix it. I walked to the desk. My burned hand throbbed, but I picked up the pen, ignoring the pain. I did not need a calculator. I did not need a computer. The numbers were burned into my brain alongside the memory of the betrayal. I started to write, the ink flowing onto the paper, outlining the correct stress vectors, the proper steel density, the truth that had been stolen from me. I wrote for 5 minutes, filling the page with complex calculus. When I finished, I ripped the page off and held it out to him. Here, I said, this is the Carter Trust. This is how you save your tower, and this is how you save your soul. Julian looked at the notepad in his hand and then at the woman standing before him. The equation she had written was not the scrawl of a madwoman, it was not the gibberish of a drug addict. It was elegant. It was precise. It was the kind of high-level structural calculus that he had not seen since his days at MIT. He traced the curve of the integral with his thumb. His heart was pounding, not with anger this time, but with a cold, terrifying dread. You cannot be serious. Vanessa laughed nervously, stepping forward to snatch the paper from his hand. She is just writing random numbers. Julian, look at her. She is high. She is trying to confuse you. Julian pulled the paper away from Vanessa's grasp. His eyes did not leave the page. Silence, he said. His voice was absent, distracted by the terrifying logic unfolding in his mind. He looked up at the blueprint on the wall. The beam on the 45th floor, the one Simone had pointed to. It looked solid, it looked strong, but now that he looked at it through the lens of her equation, he saw the weakness, he saw the catastrophe. If she is right, Julian murmured to himself, if the wind shear coefficient is off by even a fraction. He did not finish the sentence. He did not have to. He reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out his phone. His fingers moved across the screen with a speed born of panic. He scrolled past the investors, past the media contacts, finding the one number he prayed he would not have to call at midnight. What are you doing? Vanessa asked, her voice rising in pitch. Julian put the phone away. The guests are waiting for the toast. Julian ignored her. He held the phone to his ear, listening to the ringtone, echoing in the silent room. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. Finally, a groggy voice answered. Mr. Thorne? Is everything all right, Evans? Julian barked into the phone, skipping the pleasantries. Wake up! Go to your computer! Access the secure server for the tower project now, sir. It is midnight, Evans stammered, confused. Do it! Julian roared. The command bounced off the walls, making Vanessa flinch. I need you to pull up the structural schematics for the north face, specifically the load-bearing truss on the 45th floor. There was a pause on the line, followed by the sound of shuffling and the clicking of a keyboard. Julian watched Simone while he waited. She had not moved. She stood by the desk, her burned hand cradled against her chest, her chin held high. She did not look like a woman who was afraid of the answer. She looked like a woman who was tired of being right and being punished for it. I am looking at it, sir. Evans said, his voice clearer now. Alert. What am I looking for? Check the connection density, Julian said, reading the numbers Simone had written heavily on the notepad. Run a simulation for wind speeds, exceeding force 7. Check the flex ratio on the Carter truss configuration. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. The only sound in the room was Vanessa breathing hard, her face pale and tight, staring at Simone with pure hatred. Julian waited, sweat beading on his forehead. He had built his reputation on safety, on perfection. If he was building a death trap, if he was about to put thousands of people inside a glass coffin because he trusted the wrong architect, he would never forgive himself. I am running the simulation now, Evans said, his voice sounding strained. It will take a few minutes to render, sir. Why are we doing this? The final review was signed off by Ms. Kensington months ago. Just run it, Julian snapped, gripping the phone so tight his knuckles turned white. Just tell me if the building stands or falls, Evans. He lowered the phone but did not hang up. He looked at Simone, fear warring with respect in his eyes, waiting for the verdict that would either vindicate a maid or destroy an empire. The wail of sirens cut through the heavy silence of the penthouse, effectively drowning out the quiet terror of the structural equation lying on the desk. The elevator doors slid open, revealing two uniformed NYPD officers flanked by the hotel security team. Vanessa let out a sigh of relief that was too loud, too practiced. She rushed toward them, pointing a trembling finger at me. "There she is!" Vanessa cried out, her voice pitched perfectly between fear and indignation. "That is the woman who brought narcotics into my home." The officers did not ask questions. The bag of white powder was sitting on the desk, clear as day. The accusation was coming from a Kensington. The conclusion was foregone. One of the officers marched toward me, his face grim. "Turn around," he barked. "Put your hands behind your back." I looked at Julian. He was still staring at the notepad in his hand, his thumb tracing the numbers I had written. He did not look up. He did not step forward to stop them. He let the officers grab my arms, twisting them painfully behind me. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into my wrists, chafing against the burn on my palm. I gasped, but I did not fight. Fighting would only give them an excuse to hurt me more. "Julian," I whispered. The name felt like a prayer that was going unanswered. "You know this is a lie. You know who I am." Julian finally looked up. His eyes were unreadable, dark pools that gave nothing away. He looked at the handcuffs, then at Vanessa's triumphant smile, and finally at the structural diagram on the wall. "Take her," the officer said roughly, pushing me toward the elevator. "Wait," Julian said. His voice was quiet, but it stopped the room cold. My heart leaped. He was going to save me. He was going to tell them about the ring, about the promise, about the lies. Julian walked over to us. He stopped inches from my face, searching my eyes for one last time, but he did not. "Speak to me." He turned to the officer. "Do not put her in general." "Holding," Julian said. His tone was authoritative, the voice of a man who owned the city. "Keep her isolated for her own safety. My legal team will be in touch with the precinct within the hour." That is it, I thought, my heart shattering. He is not saving me. He is just managing the PR. He is making sure his maid does not get shanked in prison because it would look bad for the company. The officers shoved me into the elevator. As the doors began to close, cutting off my view of the penthouse, I saw Julian turn to his personal lawyer, who had been standing silently in the corner. I saw his lips move. I saw the intensity in his jaw. I did not hear the words then, but I learned them later. As the elevator descended, carrying me back to the hell of the system, Julian grabbed his lawyer by the lapels and whispered a command that would change everything. "Bail her out," he hissed quietly, so Vanessa could not hear. "Have the papers ready by sunrise, I do. Not care what it costs. Get her out, because if that engineer calls back and says she is right about the tower, I am going to need her to save us all." The doors shut, leaving Julian alone with a smiling liar and a terrifying truth, while I was dragged away into the night, the only innocent person in a room full of guilty millionaires. 4 a.m. The city outside was asleep, a sprawling grid of lights under a heavy pre-dawn sky. But inside the penthouse study, the air was thick with tension, heavy enough to choke on Julian. Thorne sat alone at his desk. The champagne from the party was flat. The guests were gone. Vanessa was asleep in the master bedroom, dreaming of her stolen glory, but Julian was wide awake, staring at the notepad where a maid had scribbled a mathematical prophecy. He had been staring at those numbers for 4 hours, watching the clock tick, listening to the silence, waiting for the phone to ring. He wanted Evans to call and laugh. He wanted his chief engineer to say it was nonsense, that the maid was crazy, that the building was perfect. He wanted to believe that he had not just sent an innocent genius to jail. Then the phone buzzed. It vibrated against the mahogany desk, sounding like a jackhammer in the quiet room. Julian snatched it up instantly. "Report!" Julian commanded. His voice was rough, tired. "Mr. Thorne." The voice on the other end was not the confident, arrogant tone of his Ivy League-educated chief engineer. It was the trembling whisper of a man who had just looked into the abyss and blinked. First, Evans sounded terrified. "I ran the simulation," Evans stammered. "I ran it 3 times." "Sir, I thought there was a glitch in the software. I thought the parameters were wrong because it seemed impossible." Julian closed his eyes, bracing himself for the impact. "Just say it, Evans. Is the building safe?" There was a long, agonizing pause, a silence that stretched until it became physical weight. "No," Sir Evans whispered. The word hung in the air, a death sentence for the project. The woman. Whoever wrote those calculations, she was right. The beam thickness on the 45th floor is insufficient. We calculated for static, load gravity pressing down, but we missed the dynamic wind shear, if a storm hits, if winds exceed force. 7. The connection points will fatigue instantly. "What happens?" Julian asked, though he already knew the answer. "It snaps," Sir Evans said, his voice breaking. "The north face will detach, the torque will shatter the glass curtain wall, and the upper 20 floors will collapse into the street. It would be catastrophic. It would be a mass casualty event." Julian felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him cold and numb. He looked up at the blueprint on the wall, the beautiful, prestigious Thorne Tower. It was not a monument, it was a tomb, and the only person who had seen the danger, the only person who had tried to save them, was the woman he had allowed the police to drag away in handcuffs. "Shut it down," Julian said. His voice was quiet, deadly. Sir Evans asked, "Shut it down." Julian roared, slamming his fist onto the desk, making the lamp rattle. "Stop the cranes, clear the site, cancel the concrete. Pour scheduled for this morning. I do not care if it costs us $1 million an hour. Do not let a single worker step foot on that structure until I am there." "But, Mr. Thorne, the investors," Evans started. "To hell with the investors," Julian snarled, hanging up the phone. He stood up, breathing hard, staring at the notepad. The Carter Truss. It was not just a drawing, it was the truth, and he had punished her for it. He grabbed his coat, forgetting the time, forgetting his image. He had to get to the police station. He had to get her out, because Julian Thorne realized with a sick feeling in his gut that he was not the hero of this story. He was the villain who had almost destroyed the hero. The black SUV looked like an alien spaceship landed in the middle of the Bronx. The rain was coming down hard, turning the potholed streets into rivers of black sludge. Julian Thorne stepped out of the vehicle, his Italian leather shoes sinking instantly into the grime. He did not care. He did not care about the menacing shadows in the alleyways or the sound of distant sirens. He only cared about the address clutched in his hand. The address from Simone's police file. He pushed open the rusted front door of the tenement building. The smell hit him instantly, a mix of boiled cabbage, stale urine, and damp rot. It was the smell of poverty, the smell of his own childhood. He climbed the stairs, the wood groaning under his weight, up to the 4th floor apartment. 4B. The lock was flimsy. He did not need the key the landlord had reluctantly given him. A solid kick would have shattered the doorframe. But he unlocked it slowly, his hand trembling slightly. He was not sure what he was going to find: a drug den, a stash of stolen goods, or something worse. He pushed the door open and flipped the switch. The single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered to life, casting a harsh yellow light over the room. Julian froze. He had expected filth. He had expected the chaos of a junkie's life. What he found was a monk's cell. The room was tiny, barely big enough for the mattress on the floor. There was no furniture, just a small table with a hot plate and a single chair. The window was cracked, taped over with cardboard to keep out the wind. Rainwater dripped steadily into a plastic bucket in the corner. Ping, 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 but the walls. Julian took a step forward, his breath catching in his throat. Every inch of the peeling plaster was covered. Paper was taped everywhere, old receipts, backs of flyers, brown paper bags flattened out, and on every surface there were drawings. They were not the scribbles of a madwoman, they were the work of a master. He saw his tower, the Thorne Tower, but not the sanitized version. Vanessa had presented in the boardroom. He saw the soul of the building, drawn in charcoal and pencil, in cheap blue ink, were the soaring lines of the steel skeleton. He saw the complex geometry of the wind bracing. He saw detailed cross-sections of the foundation. He walked to the wall closest to the bed. There, tacked up with rusted thumbtacks, was a sketch of the main atrium. It was breathtaking. The perspective was perfect, the light and shadow rendered with an artist's eye. But it was the notes in the margins that made Julian's knees weak. Calculations, equations regarding tensile strength and load distribution. The handwriting was small, precise, and identical to the notes Simone had written on his notepad an hour ago. He turned in a slow circle, surrounded by the undeniable proof of her genius. She lived in a box, but she dreamed of cathedrals. She slept on the floor, but she built castles in the sky. And then he saw it. Right above her pillow, taped to the wall with care, was a sketch of a young boy giving a ring to a girl in the rain. The boy looked like him. The girl looked like her. Underneath it was written in fading ink, "The promise." Julian felt like he had been punched in the gut. The air left his lungs. He fell onto the only chair in the room, the wood creaking beneath him. He covered his face with his hands. The smell of mold was gone, replaced by the scent of his own shame. He had called her a thief. He had called her a junkie. But looking at these walls, Julian realized the terrifying truth. She had not stolen anything. She had built everything, and he had destroyed her for it. Julian knelt on the splintered floorboards, ignoring the damp that seeped into his trousers. He reached under the sagging mattress of the single bed, his hand brushing against dust bunnies and cold air. His fingers closed around cardboard. He pulled it out. It was a shoebox, battered and worn, the corners reinforced with yellowing Scotch tape. It looked like trash, just like the ring had looked like trash, but Julian knew better now. He handled it like it was a holy relic. He sat on the edge of the mattress, the springs creaking loudly in the silent room. The rain drummed a relentless rhythm against the windowpane, matching the pounding of his heart. He lifted the lid. There were no stolen jewels inside. There was no cash. There were no drugs. There were letters. Hundreds of them, stacks of envelopes tied together with twine. Some were crisp and white. Others were written on napkins or pages torn from notebooks. But they all had one thing in common. On the front of every single one, written in that familiar, precise handwriting, was a single letter. J. Julian's hands shook as he untied the twine. He picked up the envelope on top, the most recent one. He did not need a letter opener. He tore it open with his thumb, desperate and terrified. "Dear J," he read. The ink was barely dry. The date was from yesterday. "I saw you today. You walked right past me in the hallway. You looked so tired, J. You have everything now. You have the money you promised we would have. You have the suits, the cars, the power. But your eyes are still the same as they were in the basement. You look lonely. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to wipe the frown, wipe off your face. But I am just a ghost to you now. I am just the help. Please eat something. Jay, you look thinner." Julian dropped the letter. It fluttered to the floor, landing by his muddy shoe. She had been watching him. not with envy, but with worry. He picked up another from the middle of the stack. The paper was yellowed, dated 5 years ago. Dear Jay, I saw you on the cover of Forbes magazine today. They call you the shark of real estate. They say you have no heart, but I know that is a lie. I know you built that wall to protect the boy inside. I wish I could tell you that I made it too. I wish I could tell you. I became an architect, but I lost everything. Jay, Vanessa took it all. But I am not angry. I am just glad you made it out. Keep climbing, Jay. Build that castle for both of us. Tears blurred Julian's vision hot and stinging. He wiped them away angrily, grabbing a third letter. It was old, the paper fragile, dated 15 years ago, the week after the fire. Dear Jay, I am cold tonight. The shelter is loud and I miss the quiet of our corner. I miss you holding my hand. I miss sharing that stale bread we stole from the kitchen. Remember? It tasted like sawdust, but it was the best meal of my life, because we shared it. I hope you are warm, wherever you are. I hope you are eating fresh bread. I will wait for you. Jay, I promised. Julian made a sound that was half sob, half scream. He clutched the letters to his chest, crushing the paper against his silk shirt. He rocked back and forth on the edge of the bed, surrounded by the echo of her love. A love that asked for nothing. A love that had survived poverty, betrayal, and time. He had accused her of being a stranger. He had called her a thief. But all this time, while he was building a fortress of money to keep the world out, she had been standing outside the gates, quietly cheering him on, holding on to a piece of copper wire and a memory. I am sorry, he whispered to the empty room, his voice breaking. I am so sorry, Cece. He carefully placed the letters back into the box. He stood up, and the grief in his eyes hardened into a steely resolve. He was done crying. He was done being the blind king. He was going to get her out. He was going to burn his own empire to the ground, if that was what it took to save the only person who had ever truly loved him. The silence in the room was louder than the storm raging outside. Julian sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, surrounded by the peeling wallpaper and the smell of damp rot. The letters were scattered around his feet like fallen leaves. Every single one of them was a testament to a love he had been too blind to see. He had spent the last 15 years building walls around his heart. He thought he was protecting himself. He thought he was strong. But sitting in this freezing apartment, he realized he was the weakest man alive. He picked up a letter dated 2 years ago. It described the day he bought his third yacht. The tabloids had called him a playboy. Simone had written, I hope the ocean brings you peace. Jay, I remember you used to say the waves sounded like breathing. A sob ripped through his chest. It was a raw, ugly sound that he had not made since the night of the fire at the orphanage. He curled forward, burying his face in his hands. The expensive Italian fabric of his suit strained against his heaving shoulders. I called her a thief, he whispered to the empty room. His voice was choked with self-loathing. I called her a rat. I let them drag her away in handcuffs while I stood there and watched. The memory of the party played in his mind on a loop. The way she had looked at him, not with hate, not with anger, but with a profound, heartbreaking disappointment. She had tried to tell him. She had shown him the ring, and he had tried to burn it. He had tried to burn the only link to the boy he used to be. Julian looked around the room again. He saw the bucket catching rainwater. He saw the empty refrigerator. He saw the thin blanket on the bed. She had nothing. Absolutely nothing. And yet she had never asked him for a dime. She could have walked into his office with that ring years ago and demanded a payout. She could have sold her story to the press. The billionaire-s, lost childhood friend. It would have been worth millions, but she did not. She scrubbed his floors. She polished his silver. She endured Vanessa's cruelty just to be near him, just to keep the promise she made in the dark basement all those years ago. I will wait for you. He was the one who broke the promise. He was the one who forgot. Julian stood up. His legs felt heavy, but his mind was suddenly crystal clear. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in his gut, but it was being pushed aside by a burning white-hot rage. Not at Simone, but at himself, and at Vanessa. He pulled his phone from his pocket. His hand was steady now. He dialed his personal driver. "Bring the car around," he ordered. His voice was terrifyingly calm. "We are going to the precinct and call the best criminal defense attorney in the city. Wake him up. I do not care if I have to pay him double." He looked at the letters one last time before gathering them up gently. He would not leave them here in the damp and the cold. They were coming with him, just like she was. "I am coming, Cece," he whispered into the darkness. "Hold on. I am coming to get you, and I am never letting you go again." The glow of the security monitors bathed Julian's face in a ghostly blue light. He stood in the nerve center of the Thorne Tower security suite, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes locked on the screen. The head of IT typed furiously on a keyboard, pulling up the raw footage from the penthouse cameras, specifically the timestamp corresponding to the arrival of the police. "Got it?" the technician said, pointing to the center monitor. "Camera 4. Service hallway coat check room." "Play it," Julian commanded. His voice was devoid of emotion. On the screen, a figure in a shimmering white silk dress glided into the frame. It was Vanessa. She looked around nervously, checking the empty hallway. Her body language was not that of a concerned fiancé. It was the furtive movement of a criminal. She slipped into the coat check room. Julian watched in sickening high definition as Vanessa located Simone's worn-out tote bag. He saw her open her expensive crystal clutch. He saw her pull out the small Ziploc bag of white powder. And he saw her shove it deep into the pocket of the gray canvas bag. Julian closed his eyes for a second, letting the reality wash over him. It was undeniable proof. She had framed Simone. She had tried to destroy an innocent woman. Life, just to cover her own lies. "Send that file to the district attorney," Julian said, opening his eyes. "Do not edit it. Do not compress it. I want the raw file on the prosecutor's desk within the hour." "Yes, Mr. Thorne," the technician said, typing rapidly. Julian turned away from the screens, pulling his phone from his pocket. It was vibrating with a call from his lead private investigator, a man named Graves, who had been digging into the archives of the Detroit foster care system for the last 3 hours. "Talk to me," Julian said, answering on the first ring. "We found her, Mr. Thorne," Graves said. His voice sounded tinny through the speaker. "We tracked down the caseworker from 98, Mrs. Gable. She is in a nursing home now, but her memory is sharp. We asked her about the fire and the death certificate, and Julian asked, leaning against the console, his knuckles white. She says she never filed a death certificate for Cecilia Vance," Graves reported. "She said Cecilia survived the fire with minor smoke inhalation. She was transferred to a facility in Ohio, but the file in the central database was altered. It was flagged as deceased 2 weeks after the fire, effectively burying her in the system so no one could find her." "Altered by who?" Julian asked, a cold dread settling in his stomach. Who had access to those files back then? Graves hesitated. "That is the interesting part. Sir," Mrs. Gable remembered a student volunteer that summer. A wealthy girl doing court-ordered community service for a DUI. She was assigned to the records room to organize files. She said the girl was obsessed with your file, specifically the notes about your separation. From Cecilia. "Give me the name," Julian whispered, though he already knew it. He could feel the answer in his blood. The volunteer's name was Vanessa Kensington, Graves said. She was 18 years old. She was the one who logged the death certificate. "Mr. Thorne, she killed Cecilia on paper 15 years ago so you would stop looking for her." The phone slipped from Julian's hand, clattering onto the desk. The room seemed to spin. Vanessa had not just stolen architecture, she had stolen his past. She had played God with 2 orphan children, deleting a human being from existence, just to clear the path for her own ambition. She had watched him mourn for 15 years, knowing all along that Cece was alive, knowing she was struggling somewhere in the cold while Vanessa slept in silk sheets. Julian looked at his reflection in the dark monitor. He did not see a victim, he saw an executioner. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. He picked up the phone again. Graves, he said, his voice steady. He said his. Find out where Vanessa is right now, and bring the car around. We are going to have a little reunion. The interrogation room was cold, colder than the winter streets of Detroit. It smelled of bleach and stale coffee and fear. Julian sat at the scratched metal table, his hands clasped tight in front of him to stop them from shaking. The heavy steel door buzzed and clicked open. A guard stepped in, followed by a figure in a bright orange jumpsuit. Simone walked in with her head held high, even though she was wearing the uniform of a criminal. She looked exhausted. Her hair was messy, pulled back in a loose tie, and her face was pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. But when she sat down across from him, she did not look broken. She looked resigned. Julian looked at her, looking for the little girl with the braids, looking for the ghost he had mourned for 15 years. He saw the burn on her hand, the bandage dirty now from the booking process. It was a physical mark of her loyalty, a wound she had taken. To save a piece of copper wire. Leave us, Julian commanded the guard without looking away from her. The guard hesitated, then nodded and left, closing the heavy door with a final ominous clank. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Julian wanted to reach across the table and take her hands. He wanted to beg for forgiveness, but he knew he did not deserve to touch her. Not yet. Why, he asked. His voice was a rasp, a broken whisper that barely carried across the table. Simone looked at him, her eyes calm and dry. Why, what, Mr. Thorne? Stop it! Julian flinched, looking pained. Do not call me that. Not now. I need to know, Simone. I need to know why you stood there and let me call you a thief. Why you let me humiliate you in front of those people. Why you let me drag you through the mud. He leaned forward, searching her face, desperate for an answer. Why didn't you tell me you were... Cece. Simone looked down at her bandaged hand, tracing the tape with her thumb. She was quiet for a long time when she finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but it cut deeper than any scream could have. I wanted to, she said. I wanted to tell you the moment I walked into that ballroom. I wanted to run up to you and show you the ring and laugh about how you finally got your castle. Then why didn't you? Julian pleaded. Because I watched you, Simone said, looking up. Her eyes were not angry. They were filled with a profound sadness that shattered him completely. I watched you look at me with disgust, because I was a maid. I watched you let Vanessa mock me. I watched you worry about your schedule and your image while I was bleeding. She took a deep breath and delivered the final blow. You asked why I didn't tell you who I was. It is simple, Julian. Because the boy I knew. The boy who shared his bread with me in the basement, he would have died before he let the police put handcuffs on me. You stood there and watched them take me away. That is how I knew that my Julian was gone. Julian felt the air leave his lungs. He fell back, against the metal chair, as if she had physically pushed him. The truth of her words tore through his defenses. He realized with a sickening clarity that she was right. He had become the very thing they used to hate. He was no longer the protector. He was just another rich man protecting his property. I am still him, Julian whispered, tears streaming down his face, unashamed. I am still that boy. Cece. Simone shook her head slowly, standing up to signal the guard that she was done. No, you are not, she said softly. The boy I loved would have known me without a ring. She turned her back on him, waiting to be taken back to her cell, leaving Julian alone in the cold room with the wreckage of his own soul. The heavy steel doors of the precinct swung open, pushing me out into the blinding morning sun of New York City. I blinked, trying to adjust to the light and the sudden freedom. The air smelled of exhaust and wet pavement, but to me it smelled like oxygen, I rubbed my wrists where the metal cuffs had left, angry red marks expecting to see a bus stop or a taxi stand. Instead, I saw him. Julian was leaning against the hood of his black sedan. He was not wearing the pristine tuxedo from the night before. He was wearing a rumpled white shirt with the top button undone and his sleeves rolled up. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had been to war and lost. But he was still standing. When he saw me, he pushed himself off the car and walked toward me. He did not stop until he was close enough for me to see the bloodshot veins in his eyes. "I am sorry," he said. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of 15 years. He reached out slowly, as if asking for permission, and gently touched my arm. "You were right, Simone. About everything. About the building. About Vanessa. About us." I looked at him, waiting for the anger to come. But I was just tired. "Julian," I said, my voice raspy, "I just want to go home." "You are going home," he promised. "But first we have something to do." He opened the passenger door for me. Not like a chauffeur, but like a partner. "Get in. We have a schedule to keep." Inside the car, the air was warm and smelled of leather and expensive coffee. Julian handed me a tablet showing a news article. The headline screamed, "Architect of the Year, Vanessa Kensington to receive prestigious Golden Compass Award." "Tonight she is getting an award," I asked, my voice hollow. "For my design." Julian started the car, his hands gripping the steering wheel tight. "She is planning to stand on a stage tonight in front of the entire industry and accept credit for the Thorne Tower. She thinks you are in a cell. She thinks I am still her puppet. She thinks she has won." He pulled into traffic, weaving through the morning rush with a dangerous precision. "We are going to change that narrative," he said. His voice was cold, hard steel. "We are not going to sue her. We are not going to file a complaint next week. We are going to that ceremony tonight." I looked down at my dirty uniform and my bandaged hand. "Julian, look at me. I am a maid with a criminal record facing drug charges. No one will listen to me." "They will listen," Julian said, glancing at me with a fierce intensity, "because I will make them listen. I have the security footage of her planting the drugs. I have the structural report proving your genius. And I have the best lawyers in the city clearing your name as we speak. The charges will be dropped by noon." He reached into the back seat and pulled out a large black box with a designer logo on it. "I bought this for you," he said. "It is not a maid's uniform. It is armor. Tonight you are not going to be the victim, Simone. You are going to be the architect. You are going to walk onto that stage and you are going to take back your name. And I will be standing right beside you holding the microphone." I touched the box, feeling a spark of hope ignite in my chest. A fire I thought had died years ago. "Why?" I whispered. "Why now?" Julian looked at the road ahead, his jaw set in a line of grim determination. "Because I promised a little girl I would build her a castle," he said softly, "and I realized that a castle is just a pile of rocks without the queen. It is time to take the throne back. Cece, are you ready to fight?" I looked at the headline on the tablet, then at the man who had finally remembered me. I took a deep breath, letting the fear dissolve into focus. "Yes," I said, clutching the box tight. "Let us go, burn her. Lie to the ground." The car stopped in front of a private entrance in Soho. It was not a beauty salon. It was a sanctuary of steel and glass, very much like the buildings I used to dream of designing. Julian did not come in. He stayed in the car, giving me the space I needed to reconstruct myself. He understood that this was a transformation I had to undergo alone. I walked through the glass doors, wearing my dirty maid uniform, smelling of the precinct and stale coffee. The staff did not flinch. They had been briefed. They did not look at me with pity. They looked at me with the focused intensity of a pit crew, preparing a race car for the final lap. The first step was the water. The shower was scalding hot steam, filling the marble room like a cloud. I scrubbed my skin until it was pink, scrubbing away the invisible layer of grime that had coated me for 5 years. I washed away the scent of lemon floor cleaner. I washed away the smell of the jail cell. I washed away the subservience. As the dark water swirled down the drain, I felt the heavy weight on my shoulders dissolve. I was washing away the maid. I was washing away the victim. I watched the water run clear, and for the first time in a decade, I felt clean, truly clean. When I stepped out, wrapped in a heavy white robe, the stylist was waiting. She held up a dress. It was beautiful. A floor-length gown of shimmering gold silk with a plunging neckline. It was a dress for a princess. It was a dress for a woman who wanted to be looked at, who wanted to be admired on the arm of a billionaire. I looked at the silk and felt a cold refusal rise in my chest. "No," I said. My voice was raspy but firm. "Take it away." The stylist looked confused. "But Madame, Mr. Thorne said you needed something for a gala. This is the season. S finest. I am not going to a ball to dance," I told her, staring at my reflection in the mirror. "I am going to a war. I do not want to look pretty. I want to look dangerous. Bring me a suit." She hesitated, then nodded, a spark of understanding lighting up her eyes. She disappeared into the back and returned with a garment bag. She unzipped it, revealing not a dress, but armor. It was a tuxedo suit tailored to perfection in a deep midnight blue that looked black under the lights. The trousers were cigarette-cut sharp and commanding. The jacket was fitted with structured shoulders that mimicked the steel beams of a skyscraper. It was architecture in fabric. I put it on. It felt like a second skin. I buttoned the jacket and it held me together tighter than any corset. I slipped into the heels. They were not glass slippers. They were black leather stilettos, sharp enough to puncture a lie. I turned to the makeup artist who was waiting with a palette of bright colors ready to paint a mask over my face. "Stop," I said, catching her hand. "No contouring. No blush. Do not try to make me look soft. Just the eyes, make them sharp." I did not want to hide the circles under my eyes. I did not want to hide the pale shock of the last 24 hours. I wanted Vanessa to see it all. I wanted her to see the exhaustion and the trauma. I wanted her to see exactly what she had done to me and realize that it had not broken me. I pulled my hair back, no soft romantic curls, no loose waves. I tied it into a sleek low bun, severe, professional, precise. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror. The woman staring back was not Cece, the orphan. She was not Simone the maid. She was Simone Carter, the valedictorian, the architect, the creator of the Thorne Tower. I adjusted my cuffs, wincing slightly as the fabric brushed my bandaged hand. The pain was grounding. It was a reminder I was not here to play a part. I was here to take over the show. I walked out of the dressing room and the stylist stepped back in silence. I did not need to ask how I looked. I looked like the person in charge. The red carpet stretched out like a tongue of crimson velvet, ready to swallow the elite of New York City. The air was electric, vibrating with the frenetic energy of 1,000 camera shutters clicking in unison. It was a symphony of narcissism, and Vanessa Kensington was the conductor. She stepped out of the limousine and the crowd erupted. Screams of adoration mixed with the shouting of photographers begging for her attention. Vanessa paused, practicing the perfect angle of her chin, allowing the light to catch the diamonds dripping from her ears. She wore a gown of liquid silver that clung to her body like a second skin, a dress designed to make everyone forget that she was a predator and see only the princess. She moved down the line, answering questions with the practiced ease of a politician. A reporter from the Architecture Digest thrust a microphone toward her, his face flushed with excitement. "Ms. Kensington," he shouted over the roar of the crowd, The Thorne Tower is being hailed as the most innovative structure of the decade. Can you tell us about the moment of conception? How did you come up with the Carter Truss design? Although I believe you call it the Kensington Weeping Willow support? Vanessa laughed a light musical sound that she had perfected in front of a mirror. It was charming, it was modest, it was completely fake. Oh, please, she said, waving a manicured hand dismissively. The technical terms are so dry, aren't they? I prefer to think of it as art. I was in Paris actually watching the rain fall against the window of my hotel room. I saw how the water moved, how it flowed, and I thought the building should be like that. It should not fight the wind, it should dance with it. The structure just came to me like a vision. It was intuition, really. Pure female intuition. The reporters nodded, eating up the lies, scribbling down her words as if they were gospel. They did not ask about the wind load coefficients. They did not ask about the steel density ratios. They just saw a beautiful woman telling a beautiful story, and that was enough for them. Vanessa smiled, feeling a warm glow of satisfaction in her chest. It was so easy. People wanted to be lied to. They wanted the fairy tale. They did not want to know that the design was stolen from a scholarship student who was currently sitting in a jail cell in the Bronx. The thought of Simone made Vanessa's smile widen. She checked her diamond-encrusted watch. It was 8:00. By now, Simone would have been processed. By now, she would be sitting on a metal bench surrounded by real criminals, terrified and alone. The drug charge would stick. Vanessa had made sure of that. The Kensingtons had judges in their pockets, just like they had politicians. Simone was gone, erased, buried under the weight of a felony she would never speak again. She would never challenge the Queen. Vanessa took a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. The bubbles danced on her tongue, tasting like victory. She looked up at the banners hanging from the entrance of the hall. Vanessa Kensington Architect of the Year. The letters were 10 feet tall, printed in gold. This was it, the moment she had schemed for. The moment she had killed for practically. She turned to the camera one last time, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous, triumphant light. I dedicate this award to hard work, she lied, looking straight into the lens. To everyone who told me I couldn't do it. Watch me now. She turned and walked into the gala, the train of her silver dress trailing behind her, like the tail of a serpent, leaving the noise of the street behind, ready to ascend the throne she had stolen, ready to accept the applause of a world she had successfully fooled. The ballroom lights dimmed slowly, turning the sea of tuxedos and designer gowns into a hushed ocean of shadows. A single spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the podium at the center of the stage. The chatter died down instantly, replaced by a reverent silence. Everyone knew who was coming. Everyone knew that when Julian Thorne spoke, the city listened. Julian walked onto the stage from the left wing. He moved with the heavy, inevitable grace of a storm front rolling in. He was wearing his tuxedo, but he had not bothered to fix his tie. It hung slightly loose, a subtle sign of disorder that no one else noticed. But Vanessa noticed. Sitting at the center table in the front row, clutching her crystal clutch, she smiled. She thought it was a look of passion. She thought he had rushed here from the police station, eager to stand by her side, eager to share in her glory. She sat up straighter, smoothing the silver silk of her dress over her hips, making sure the cameras had a clear line of sight. She was the queen of the evening, and Julian was her king, coming to place the crown on her head. Julian gripped the sides of the podium. His knuckles were white. He looked out into the blinding glare of the stage lights, shielding his eyes to scan the front row. He found her instantly. Vanessa sat there beaming up at him, her face a mask of false modesty and genuine greed. She looked beautiful, in the way a poisonous flower is beautiful, vibrant and deadly. Julian leaned into the microphone. The sound of his breath, amplified by the speakers, sent a shiver through the room. "Thank you all for coming," he said. His voice was low, a deep baritone that rumbled through the floorboards. We are gathered here tonight to celebrate architecture, to celebrate the visionaries who build our skyline, who turn steel and glass into dreams. Vanessa nodded gracefully, accepting the compliment that had not been given yet. She touched her chest lightly, pantomiming humility for the press. The Thorne Tower is more than just a building, Julian continued, his eyes locking onto Vanessa's. The crowd thought he was looking at her with adoration. Julian was looking at her with the cold calculation of a sniper waiting for the wind to die down. It is a symbol. It is a testament to what happens when we refuse to compromise, when we refuse to accept the standard limitations of physics and society. Applause rippled through the room, polite and restrained. Vanessa clapped the loudest, her eyes shining. She whispered to the woman next to her. "He is talking about my design." Julian raised a hand, silencing the room instantly. "But a building is only as strong as its foundation," he said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming harder, sharper, "and a legacy is only as strong as the truth that supports it. We often look at the glittering surface, the glass, the steel, the height, and we forget what lies beneath. We forget the calculations. We forget the struggle. We forget the hands that actually did the work." Vanessa's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She felt a tiny prick of unease. The speech was taking a strange turn. It was too serious, too heavy. But then she reassured herself Julian was just being dramatic. He loved the gravitas. He was building up to the big reveal, the moment he would call her name and hand her the golden trophy. "Tonight," Julian said, his voice ringing out with a terrifying finality, "we are not here to honor a pretty picture. We are not here to honor a last name or a bank account. Tonight, we are here to honor the absolute, unvarnished truth. We are here to recognize the real architect of the Thorne Tower." Vanessa stood up slightly, readying herself to walk up the stairs, ready to accept her prize. She smoothed her hair, waiting for her name to fill the air, waiting for the applause that would drown out the quiet voice of her conscience forever. She looked at Julian, expecting a smile, expecting a hand reached out in welcome. But Julian did not smile. He did not look welcoming. He looked like a judge delivering a death sentence. Julian stepped back from the microphone. He did not look at the confused audience. He did not look at the cameras. He simply raised his hand and snapped his fingers. The sound was sharp and decisive, echoing through the silent ballroom like a pistol shot. The massive LED screen behind him, which had been displaying the Golden Thorn logo, flickered. It went black for a terrifying second, plunging the stage into darkness, and then it exploded into light. The image was split down the middle, dividing the world into two distinct realities. On the left side of the screen was a scanned image of a hand-drawn sketch. It was done on cheap graph paper, the edges yellowed and torn, but the drawing itself was a masterpiece of engineering. It showed the complex web of the Carter Truss, the specific load-bearing geometry that held up the sky. In the bottom corner, written in a distinct, precise hand, was a date, October 12, 2018, 5 years ago, and signed. Next to the date was a name, Simone Carter. On the right side of the screen was a sleek, digital rendering. The lines were cleaner, but the soul was missing. It was the official submission for the Thorne Tower, filed by Vanessa Kensington. The date stamped on the digital file was only 6 months ago. It was a clumsy copy, a pale imitation that missed the crucial structural details. The contrast was undeniable. It was the difference between a master artist and a tracer. A murmur ran through the crowd, starting as a low buzz and rising quickly to a roar of shock. People were pointing at the dates, doing the math. Realizing that the maid in the jail cell had invented the future, half a decade before the heiress had even claimed it. Vanessa stood frozen at her table. Her face had drained of all color, leaving her looking like a wax statue. She opened her mouth to scream, to object, to call it a lie. But before she could make a sound, The screen flickered again. The blueprints vanished, replaced by a video feed. The timestamp in the corner read 10:30 p.m. the previous night. It was the coat check room. Everyone recognized the woman in the white silk dress. There was no mistaking the cut of the gown or the shimmer of the diamonds. It was Vanessa. The entire room watched in horrified silence as the on-screen Vanessa opened her clutch. Her face was twisted in a sneer of pure malice. She pulled out the bag of white powder. The camera zoomed in, capturing the moment. She shoved the fake fentanyl into the gray canvas tote bag, capturing the moment she framed an innocent woman to protect her stolen legacy. The reaction in the ballroom was visceral. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room, followed immediately by the crash of breaking glass. Vanessa's champagne flute slipped from her numb fingers, hitting the floor and shattering, spraying expensive vintage wine over her silver dress. Like blood, she looked around frantically. The admiration in the eyes of the guests was gone, replaced by revulsion, replaced by the look one gives to a monster. The photographers who had been worshipping her moments ago were now flashing their cameras, relentlessly capturing her downfall. Documenting the exact second her life fell apart, Julian stood on the stage watching the chaos. He looked like an avenging angel, cold and untouchable. He did not need to shout. He did not need to argue. He had simply turned on the lights and let the cockroaches run. "It is fake!" Vanessa shrieked. Her voice cracked, splintering the heavy silence of the ballroom. She lunged toward the stage, her silver dress tangling around her legs. She looked like a fallen angel trying to claw her way back into heaven. "That video is doctored!" she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at the massive screen. "It is AI generated. It is a smear campaign, Julian. How could you do this to me?" She turned to the crowd, her eyes wild and desperate, searching for an ally, searching for anyone who would believe the lie over their own eyes. "My father owns this network," she yelled at a cameraman. "Turn that off. Stop filming me immediately. I will sue every single one of you. I am Vanessa Kensington. I am the victim here." But no one moved. No one turned off their cameras. The shutter clicks accelerated, sounding like a swarm of angry locusts devouring the remains of her reputation. The guests, the investors, the peers she had tried to impress, they all stared at her with a mix of pity and absolute revulsion. She was standing in the wreckage of her own arrogance, and she was the only one who did not realize the building had already collapsed. Julian watched her from the podium. He did not look angry anymore. He looked tired. He looked like a man who was finally putting down a heavy load he had carried for far too long. He leaned into the microphone and his voice boomed through the hall, cutting through Vanessa's hysterical denials like a blade. "Stop talking!" Vanessa, Julian commanded. The authority in his tone froze her in place. She stood at the foot of the stairs, looking up at him, her chest heaving with panic. "You did not just steal a drawing," Julian said, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You stole a life. You stole 5 years from a woman whose only crime was being more talented than you. You took Simone Carter's portfolio, and you put your name on it. You took her scholarship, and you let her starve. You took her future, and you built a career on a foundation of lies." He stepped out from behind the podium, walking to the edge of the stage, looking down at her. "And that was not enough for you, was it?" Julian asked softly. The microphone caught every syllable, every nuance of his disgust. "You had the money, you had the fame, but you could not stand the fact that she was still breathing. You could not stand the fact that even in a maid's uniform she was more of an architect than you will ever be. So you tried to finish the job. You planted those drugs, Vanessa. I saw the footage. You tried to send her to prison for 20 years. You tried to bury her in a cage so you could keep playing pretend in my penthouse." "That is not true," Vanessa sobbed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup, cutting tracks through the powder. "It was a mistake. I didn't know." "You knew," Julian interrupted sharply. "You knew exactly what you were doing, just like you knew exactly what you were doing. 15 years ago when you altered a death certificate in a dusty records room in Detroit. You tried to kill Cece Vance on paper so I would stop looking for her. You tried to separate us forever just because you were jealous of a bond you could never understand. The crowd gasped. The revelation hit them like a physical wave. Murder, fraud, forgery. It was not just a corporate scandal anymore. It was the unveiling of a sociopath. Vanessa took a step back, shaking her head violently. No, she whispered, backing away, looking toward the exit, looking for an escape route. I am leaving. You are insane, Julian. I am going to call my father and he will destroy you. You are not going anywhere, Julian said. His voice was final, absolute. He pointed toward the shadows of the wings, stage left. Look to your right. Vanessa. Vanessa froze. She turned her head slowly, terrified of what she would find. The velvet curtains parted. Two men in dark suits stepped out. They were not hotel security. They were not local police. They moved with the grim purpose of federal agents. On the back of their windbreakers, printed in bold yellow letters that left no room for interpretation, was the acronym FBI. They have been waiting for you, Julian said, checking his watch. They have the video evidence of the narcotics distribution. They have the sworn testimony of the university board regarding the academic fraud. And they have the original structural reports proving that you knowingly signed off on a dangerous building design, endangering the lives of thousands. Vanessa let out a strangled sound, half sob, half scream. You are under arrest, Ms. Kensington, one of the agents said, stepping off the stage and producing a pair of silver handcuffs. Julian looked at her one last time as the agents grabbed her arms, pulling her expensive silver dress, effectively pinning the fallen queen. The look in his eyes was not hate. It was the total absence of feeling. He was done with her. She was a ghost. Take her away, Julian said, turning his back on her. And make sure she gets a cell with a view. She loves architecture, after all. As the agents dragged a screaming, kicking Vanessa out of the ballroom, Julian looked out at the stunned, silent crowd. He took a deep breath, adjusting his cuffs. Now he said, his voice shifting, becoming warm and reverent for the first time that night. I would like to introduce you to the real architect of the Thorne Tower. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Simone Carter. The heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom did not just open, they swung wide as if pushed by an invisible tide. The darkness of the hallway behind them seemed to stretch into infinity, a void from which only the strong could return. A single spotlight swung from the ceiling, cutting a stark white path through the gloom. It hit the doorway with the precision of a laser, and there stood. The room went deathly silent. It was not the confused silence of before, or the horrified silence of the arrest. It was the silence of awe. It was the kind of quiet that falls over a cathedral when the choir begins to sing. Simone. Carter stepped into the light. She was not wearing the gray apron that had defined her existence for 5 years. She was not holding a mop or a tray of champagne glasses. She was wearing the midnight blue tuxedo suit Julian had given her. The fabric drank in the light, making her look like a shadow made solid. The sharp, structured shoulders gave her the silhouette of a warrior. The cigarette pants ended in lethal black stilettos that clicked against the marble floor with a rhythm that sounded like a heartbeat. Click, click, click. She began to walk. She did not rush. She did not look down at her feet. She kept her chin high, her eyes locked on the stage where Julian stood waiting for her. The crowd parted instinctively. They moved back not because they were told to, but because her presence demanded it. The investors who had ignored her when she was serving them hors d'oeuvres now stared with their mouths open. The socialites who had laughed at Vanessa as cruel jokes now looked at the floor, unable to meet the burning gaze of the woman they had mocked. Simone walked through the center of the room, and it felt like walking through fire. She could feel the heat of 1,000 eyes on her skin. She could hear the whisper of her own name rippling through the crowd like a spell. Simone Carter. Simone Carter. The name tasted strange to them, new and dangerous, but to her it tasted like oxygen. She passed the table where Vanessa had been sitting just moments ago. The spilled champagne was still wet on the floor, a puddle of gold amidst the ruin. But Simone did not look at the mess. She stepped over it. Her heel came down inches from the broken glass, but she did not flinch. She was done cleaning up other people's messes. She reached the stairs leading to the stage. They were steep, bathed in the blinding glare of the footlights. But she did not stumble. She ascended them with the grace of a queen returning to her throne. Every step was a victory. Every step was a reclamation of the years she had lost. Julian was standing by the podium. He looked at her, and the expression on his face made her heart soar. He did not look at her with pity or guilt. He looked at her with pure, unadulterated pride. He stepped back, moving out of the spotlight, giving her the center stage. He was the billionaire. He was the owner. But in this moment, he was just the man, holding the door open for the genius. Simone walked to the podium. She placed her hands on the sleek black surface. Her left hand was still bandaged, the white gauze, a stark contrast to the dark suit. She did not hide it. She let it rest there, a badge of honor, proof of what she was willing to endure to save the truth. She leaned forward. The microphone hummed slightly, adjusting to her presence. She looked out at the sea of faces. Lights blinded her slightly, but she did not blink. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive perfume and ozone and fear. I am Simone Carter, she said. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear. It resonated through the speakers, filling every corner of the vast hall. It carried the weight of the nights she spent freezing in a dorm room, the days she spent starving in a shelter, and the years she spent invisible in plain sight. For 5 years, I have watched you admire this tower, she continued, her eyes sweeping across the room. You admired the glass. You admired the height. You admired the way it seemed to defy the wind. But you were admiring a lie. She gestured to the screen behind her, where her hand-drawn sketch was still glowing bright and undeniable. Architecture is not about drawing pretty lines, she said simply. It is about survival. It is about understanding the forces that try to tear you down. Gravity, wind, rain, and building something that refuses to break. I designed the Thorne Tower, not to be a monument to vanity, but to be a shelter. I designed the Carter Truss because I know what it feels like to carry a weight that should crush you, and I know how to stand tall anyway. She paused, letting the words sink in. Vanessa Kensington told you this building was inspired by a rainy day in Paris. Simone said, her voice hardening slightly. But she lied. This building was inspired by a cold night in Detroit. It was inspired by the resilience of the people who have nothing, and yet still manage to build a life out of scraps. She looked at Julian, and for a brief second, her mask of strength softened into a smile. This tower is not a symbol of wealth, she said, turning back to the crowd. It is a promise kept. It is the proof that you can burn the paper, you can steal the credit, and you can lock the architect in a cage, but you cannot destroy the mind that built it. She gripped the microphone tighter, her knuckles white. My name is Simone Carter. She repeated the words, ringing out like a church bell. And this tower is my mind, and tonight I am taking it back. The applause that followed Simone's declaration was thunderous, a rolling wave of noise that shook the crystal chandeliers overhead. But as Julian stepped closer to her, the sound seemed to fade into the background, becoming nothing more than white noise. The only thing that mattered was the woman standing in front of him. The woman in the midnight blue suit who had just reclaimed her life with nothing but her voice and her truth. Julian looked at her, and for the first time in 15 years, He did not see the maid. He did not see the stranger. He did not even see the architect. He saw Cece. He saw the girl with soot on her face and fire in her eyes, the girl who had held his hand in the dark when the world was burning. He took a step forward, entering the circle of the spotlight. The cameras flashed wildly, capturing the two of them, framed against the backdrop of the massive LED screen, still displaying the stolen blueprints. The crowd, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, leaned forward. The air was thick with anticipation. Then Julian did the unthinkable. The man known as the Shark of New York, the man who never bowed to anyone, who tore down buildings and swallowed companies whole, stopped in front of the entire city, in front of the millions watching at home. Julian Thorne slowly lowered himself down. He bent his left leg and sank to the floor. The expensive fabric of his tuxedo trousers stretched across his knee as it hit the hard marble stage. He was kneeling, not in defeat, but in absolute reverence. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the ballroom. It was sharp and audible. Hands flew to mouths. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Is he proposing? Is he going to ask her to marry him right now after she just exposed his fiancée? Simone looked down at him, her eyes wide with shock. She took a half step back, her heart hammering against her ribs. Julian, she whispered, the microphone catching the tremble in her voice. What are you doing? Get up! Everyone is watching. Let them watch, Julian said. His voice was not whispered. It was projected calm and steady. He did not care about the cameras. He did not care about the board of directors. He only cared about the promise he had broken. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. His hand emerged holding a small box. It was deep blue velvet, the kind of box that usually holds a diamond worth a small country. The crowd held its breath. The camera operators zoomed in their lenses, focusing on the small object in his palm. Julian opened the box. There was no diamond inside. There was no platinum, no gold, no glittering gemstone that caught the light. Inside, nestled in the white satin, like a holy relic, was a circle of twisted copper wire. It was tarnished. It was rough. It was bent out of shape. But to the two people on that stage, it shone brighter than the sun. Julian looked up at Simone, his eyes swimming with unshed tears. I told the world I was building a legacy, he said, his voice cracking. With emotion, I told them I was building a tower that would touch the sky. But I was lying. I was just building a lighthouse, hoping that if I made it bright enough, you would find your way back to me. He took a shaky breath, the weight of his regret pressing down on him. But I was the one who was lost, he continued. I was so blinded by the lights, I was so obsessed with the image of perfection that I didn't see the perfection standing right in front of me, scrubbing my floors. I looked for you in the faces of socialites and heiresses, but I forgot to look for you in the one place that mattered. I forgot to look for the girl who builds things out of nothing. Simone brought her hand to her mouth, tears spilling over her cheeks, ruining the severe look she had tried to maintain. The armor was cracking and the girl underneath was shining through. I am sorry, Julian said. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. I am sorry for every day you spent alone. I am sorry for every meal you missed while I was feasting. I am sorry that I let them put you in handcuffs. And most of all, I am sorry that it took me 20 years to keep my promise. He lifted the box higher, offering the copper ring like it was a crown. This is not a proposal of marriage, Julian said softly, answering the question on everyone's mind. I have not earned that right yet. This is an apology. This is an admission that without you, I am just a man with a lot of money and no direction. This wire is the only thing I have ever truly owned. Cece, it is the only contract that matters. He looked deep into her eyes, ignoring the flashing lights, ignoring the world. I am sorry for making you wait 20 years, he whispered. Please tell me I am not too late. Simone looked at the ring. The copper wire she had found in a dumpster. The wire he had twisted into a circle on a rainy Tuesday in the basement. the symbol of a bond that fire could not burn and time could not erase. She reached out her bandaged hand trembling and touched the cold metal. "You are not late," she choked out a smile, breaking through her tears. "You are just in time." The copper wire caught the light, glimmering in the blue velvet box, like a trapped star. Julian remained on one knee, his eyes filled with a desperate hope, waiting for me to reach out and accept the apology, waiting for the fairy tale ending where the prince rescues the Cinder Girl and they ride off into the sunset. But I was not Cinderella, and this was not a fairy tale. This was business. I looked at the ring. It represented the past. It represented the love that had kept me warm in a cold basement. But then I looked at the building on the screen behind us, the Thorne Tower, my tower, that represented my future. That represented the genius I had fought to protect while scrubbing toilets and enduring insults. I reached out my hand, but I did not take the ring. Instead, I gently closed the lid of the velvet box, snapping it shut with a soft click that echoed through the microphone. Julian blinked, confusion clouding his eyes. He started to stand up, panic rising in his chest. "Cece," he whispered. "Is it too late?" "No, Julian," I said, my voice steady and amplified for the whole world to hear. "It is not too late for the boy and the girl, but it is too early for the billionaire and the maid." I took a step back, creating space between us, changing the dynamic from a romantic proposal to a negotiation. I smoothed the lapels of my midnight blue tuxedo suit, reminding everyone in the room that I was wearing armor, not a ball gown. "You asked for forgiveness," I said, "and you have it. But you also asked for my mind. You built a billion-dollar company on my ideas while I was starving. You want the architect, Julian. Then you have to pay the architect." The room went deadly silent again. The tension was palpable. People were exchanging glances, wondering if I was asking for money, wondering if I was about to demand a payout. "I do not want a check." I continued, my voice rising with authority. "And I do not want to be the billionaire's wife, who smiles at galas and cuts ribbons. I am not looking for a savior. Julian, I am looking for an equal." I pointed to the massive logo of Thorne Enterprises projected on the wall. "I want my name on the door," I said. "I want 50% equity. I want to be a managing partner, not a silent partner. If you want Simone Carter, you do not get a fiancé, you get a co-owner." The crowd gasped. The audacity of the demand was staggering, a maid asking for half an empire in front of the city's elite. It was unheard of. It was impossible. Julian stared at me for a long heartbeat. His face was unreadable, and then slowly, a smile spread across his face. It was not a polite smile. It was a grin of pure admiration. He looked at me like I had just solved the hardest equation in the world. "Done," he said. He did not call his lawyers. He did not ask to schedule a meeting. He turned to the nearest dinner table and grabbed a silver Sharpie from a stunned waiter. He then grabbed the corner of the expensive white linen tablecloth and yanked it hard, sending crystal glasses crashing to the floor. He did not care. He pulled the cloth onto the stage, spreading it out over the podium. "Right here," Julian said, uncapping the marker. "Right now." He wrote furiously on the fabric. The screech of the marker was the only sound in the room, in huge, bold letters. He wrote Simone Carter, partner, 50% owner. He signed his name underneath it with a flourish, then spun the podium around so the camera could see the makeshift contract. "Is that acceptable, Ms. Carter?" he asked, his eyes dancing with joy. I looked at the tablecloth, then at the man who was willing to destroy a gala to build a future with me. I smiled, picking up the marker and signing my name next to his. "Perfect, Mr. Thorne," I said. The room exploded. It was not polite applause this time. It was a roar of approval, a standing ovation for the woman who had refused to settle for a ring when she deserved a kingdom. The autumn sun over Detroit was not cold today. It felt like a benediction warming the red brick facade of the new building, standing on the very lot where the old orphanage had burned down 20 years ago. The ashes were gone, The ghosts were gone. In their place stood the haven, a sanctuary of glass and warm cedar wood, designed to catch the light and hold it inside. I stood at the top of the stairs looking out at the crowd. It was not a crowd of socialites in tuxedos holding champagne glasses. It was a crowd of children. There were teenagers in hoodies, families from the neighborhood, and social workers who finally had a facility worthy of their dedication. The air did not smell of expensive perfume. It smelled of fresh paint and falling leaves and hope. Julian stood next to me. He was wearing a suit, but he had left the tie at home. His top button was undone, and he looked younger than he had in years. The shark-like tension that used to define his jawline was gone, replaced by a quiet, easy smile. He was not holding his phone, checking stock prices, or yelling at assistants. He was holding the other handle of the oversized ceremonial ribbon-cutting scissors. "Ready, partner?" he asked, his voice low and warm. "Just for me." I looked up at him. "Smiling ready," I said. We squeezed the handles together. The sharp steel sliced through the thick red velvet ribbon with a satisfying crunch. The fabric fluttered to the ground, and the crowd erupted into cheers. It was a sound better than any applause at a gala. It was the sound of a promise being kept, as the photographers snapped pictures capturing the moment for the morning papers. I adjusted my grip on the scissors, and the sunlight caught the object on my ring finger. It was not a diamond the size of a skating rink. It was not a rare sapphire dug from the earth. It was a simple circle of twisted copper wire, tarnished by time and shaped by the hands of a boy in a basement. I rubbed my thumb over the rough metal. It was the most valuable thing I owned. It was a reminder of where we came from and a compass for where we were going. Julian leaned in close, his shoulder brushing against mine, ignoring the cameras. "What is next on the agenda?" "Boss," he whispered, nodding toward the easel standing behind us. It held the blueprints for our next project, a sustainable housing complex for low-income families. I laughed, feeling the lightness in my chest. "I think we need to review the structural integrity of the West Wing again," I said, "and then maybe we can go get a sandwich." "Fresh bread?" Julian asked, grinning. "Fresh bread," I promised. He took my hand, the one with the copper ring, and squeezed it tight. The cameras flashed, but we were not posing for them anymore. We were just two kids who had survived the fire, standing in the light of the future we had built. As we walked down the stairs to greet the children, the world seemed to open up before us, wide and limitless. We had spent so long running from the past, running toward a finish line that kept moving. But now we had stopped running. We had started building. We used to dream of a castle high on a hill where nothing could ever hurt us again. We thought safety meant stone walls and high towers. But looking at the building behind us and the man beside me, I realized we had built something far stronger than stone. The fairy tale was wrong. The castle was never the goal. The ending was never about sitting on a throne. It was about the hand you hold while you lay the bricks. It was about the empire you build together. Not out of gold, but out of resilience, out of truth, and out of love. This is our reality, and it is better than any dream. The most profound lesson we can take from the journey of Simone and Julian is that true worth is indestructible, and that integrity is the only foundation that can withstand the storms of life. Throughout this story, we watch two characters navigate a world obsessed with appearances. Julian the billionaire was blinded by the glittering surface of his success, unable to see the genius standing right in front of him because she was wearing a Maid uniform. Simone, on the other hand, had been stripped of everything: her parents, her home, her credit, and her name. Yet she never lost the one thing that mattered: her mind. This narrative reminds us that your identity is not defined by your current circumstances or your job title. Simone was an architect when she was sleeping in a shelter, and she was an architect when she was scrubbing floors. Her value did not come from a diploma on the wall or a bank account. It came from her undeniable talent and her refusal to give up the world. May try to label you based on what you have, but only you can define who you are, based on what you can build. Furthermore, the story teaches us about the nature of legacy and partnership. Julian thought he could build a legacy alone, using his money to erect a tower that touched the sky. But he learned that a building without a soul is just a hollow shell. He needed Simone, not just as a romantic partner, but as an intellectual equal. The moment they signed that tablecloth was not just a victory for romance, it was a victory for respect. It showed us that true love is not about one person saving another. It is about two people standing side by side looking in the same direction. Ultimately, we learn that the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you bury it. Vanessa had the money, the connections, and the lies, but she built her house on sand. Simone built her house on the bedrock of truth and hard work. In a world full of noise and shortcuts, this story is a quiet reminder to keep your head down, keep doing the work, and trust that eventually your quality will speak louder than their marketing. Would you like me to generate a prompt for an image of the final scene with the copper ring and the blueprints, or should we begin developing a new story concept together?